Hello.
Hi, Paul. How are you?
Hi, it's nice to meet you, Amber.
Nice to meet you too. Let me make sure you can see me. Just one of them days. Speaking of things, I'm
Right?
having one of them days.
Well, we'll go ahead and get started. And first of all, hi to everybody joining us. My name is Leslie, and I'm a writer at Push Black. And we're so glad to host the second part of our series on Black trauma. Today, we're going to be talking about problematic phrases, which is a good thing because we're coming up to the holidays. And for those of you who celebrate Thanksgiving, you're going to be around family. And we all know sometimes that family can actually, you know, say some things, have some questions. So we're really glad to have our two guests with us today. My first guest is Farah Jones, and she's an expert and does workshops on everything that we will need to talk about today, including trauma and working with populations that are sometimes not talked about. We also have joining us today a friend of Push Black, the good sister Amber Abundance. And if you haven't seen our talk about her short film Abundance, please go back and watch that, and also be sure to see her short film. So one of the things before we get started is first a big thank you to our viewers and our readers of Push Black. We couldn't do this work without you, and we really would love to have you join us. So you'll see the opportunity to donate. Please donate if you got it. If you don't got it, share it with your rich relatives who got it, and we're gonna
Come on.
all make it together. So we thank you all so much for that. All right. So y'all, let's go ahead and get into our discussion. Um, and let's just put it out on the table. Like, there are all these isms and phobias that keep us from loving ourselves. Colorism, homophobia, fat phobia. So where do these come from, and what makes them so anti-Black?
Ooh.
This is the one I just want to say thank you again for having me on. It's such a big question, right? There's so many different forms of discrimination, marginalization, ways that we, judge or discriminate against each other within our own community. But one of the things that you're talking about, and I think that we don't talk about enough, is that there's actually, for a lot of these issues, there are historical anti-Black roots. When we talk about colorism, that one's probably pretty clear to a lot of people. When we think about the paper bag tests or about what was going on during enslavement. But we often don't talk about how things like fat phobia and homophobia have historical anti-Black roots too. I don't think enough of us talk about how pre-colonization, there were all kinds of communities and cultures in Africa that were not similar necessarily to how we do things here today. That, different ways of experiencing gender, different ways of organizing families, different thinking about what masculinity means, what femininity means, right? And so a lot of what we consider to be our culture today was actually imposed on Black people during colonization. And there's a similar history around talking about body size. What's the ideal body size and shape? A lot of that was imposed by white supremacy as well. And so I think that there's so many books and articles and ways to dig into and read about that history that I think a lot of us haven't had the opportunity to do. And I encourage all the viewers to be doing, that research and reading Push Black stories, because I know Push Black is often telling those stories that were hidden from history, So that's kind of a brief overview, but I think that a lot of the stuff that happens in our community, we think about, or it's framed as like, oh, this is our culture problem, or this is, we're just particularly homophobic or particularly this or that, but a lot of that, those things that we see are actually the legacy of enslavement and colonization and anti-blackness for the last few centuries.
Thank you. Wow. So Amber, you tackled all of that in your short film.
Mm-hmm.
You just busted out on it. Were you really, what were you thinking about when you were doing that film? Was it really the anti-blackness of it all, or was this more of a just like, look, here I am in this body and y'all are gonna get this regardless and you're gonna love all this blackness? Or was it none of this and I'm just putting things out there in the atmosphere?
No, I think any themes of like big macro political themes that people pull out of abundance are right. The entry point for me is to show a world where those are not at play currently. So there's a lot of visual comfort in abundance. What does it mean to be able to sit in your solitude or sit in your comfort or sit in conversation with other people who are like you and just tell it how it is and vision how it could be, which I think a lot of times Black people, fat folks, queer folks, that is where I get my most imagination, is being surrounded by other people like me who have those experiences, who can do that work of removing that barrier of gaslighting and explanation, right? If people are being honest, y'all know these things trace back to white folks. We know that. You know that. And those same ideas are held by the people in positions of power who treat people the way they do or put spotlights on people who they want to put spotlights or not on because it's lucrative. Slavery, colonization, that stuff was lucrative. That's capitalism. That's the heart of capitalism. My neighborhood is deciding to turn out right now, so shout out. But in order to get out of that, I feel like we have to have real conversations with each other, especially when other people are watching, right? A lot of these comments around not talking about colorism or homophobia in our communities is like, oh, we have to save that conversation for elsewhere. But what I know to be true for myself is when you have those kind of healing conversations, those healing pieces of art where it gets down to the specificity of the matter, where everyone can see it, you allow other people to enter into that space of possibility. So I'm very I'm not just going to wait, keep it family business. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, and they have that saying like, if you're going to fight, make sure people are watching so they leave you alone. That's my approach to the art. I'm a whoop white supremacy's ass in front of everybody. So you can see something else, you know what I mean?
Right.
So yeah, I think all those notes are true. I'm not running away from the political nature of my work, but I am going to tell it from a place of my own comfort, joy, and abundance.
Cool. Okay, so speaking of fight, let me push back a little bit on something that both of you all said. Okay, so isn't everybody entitled to their own opinions? So what if I don't like fat people or light-skinned people? How am I hurting the Black community or our community at all if I'm phobic, if I don't feel comfortable
And that's not
around?
something you with. That's not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, I'm sure you're going to jump in, about all these things is we tend to say, oh, I don't like that out there. But the phobias that we hold against other people, we practice on ourselves first. So if you don't like fat people, you don't, and maybe you're gaining weight, or there's somewhere in your life where you're regulating yourself to the things that you disdain in other people.
Mm.
If you don't care for trans folks, there's something you're doing currently in your life that is preventing you from accessing the fullness of your gender expression.
Mm. Yes.
So as much as this is about us, this is really about you. And I think when you sit and listen to a lot of Black trans women, when you listen to dark-skinned fat people, and you really get with what they're saying, They're talking about their personal journeys of acceptance, hoping you might participate so that you can be less of an asshole to other people.
Okay. Yes.
Mm.
Yes.
Amber, that is so powerful. I've often thought about how the things that we are most bothered by when other people do them are actually the things that we're most bothered about ourselves.
Right.
And so
Trying to
that's
push down and prevent and hold on to, and for what?
Mhm,
Your liberation is caught up in mine, hun.
mhm. I think the other aspect of this too, that in terms of like how you ask the question, like how does it hurt, our community if I just like have a preference, if I just whatever, if I just, or like I don't like gay folks, I don't like trans folks, I don't like fat folks, whatever. And it's like I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. You can have a bad opinion, but the thing is, you can't have that opinion then also claim that you're here for, say, Black liberation,
Mm-hmm.
because there's Black gay people, there's Black trans people, there's fat, dark skin, light skin, Black people, all colors, all identities, etc. So if you're gonna have that opinion about that group of people, there's Black people in that group. So if you're going to have that opinion, then don't come out here and say that you're for Black liberation, or that
Right.
you don't come out here and say Black Lives Matter, because which Black lives? Only the ones that you personally approve of? That's not liberation. Liberation's for all of us, right? All Black lives matter. So I think I don't get too pressed when people have an opinion, or like hate me for my identity or whatever, because like, do you, and like Amber was saying, like that's on you, like you've got something, you've got to work through your own feelings, like it's about you, it's not really about me. But I think if you're gonna have like uh you know integrity of your position about like, I'm here for my community, I love Black people, you know I think that means you got to figure out how to love all Black people.
Beautiful.
And if not, stay at home. Social distance.
Right.
Stay
Right.
away from us, because you're not going to hold up my liberation and liberation of people who need it the most, because you don't want to deal with your stuff. Stay at home then. Stick it out with them. Stick it out with white supremacy. Because the truth is, not everybody can come. Some of y'all are enemies of progress. But that's just me. These are my thoughts.
Well, but you know what though? It's true. And I think that this is a reason that we're having this conversation. And this is a reason that we really need to talk about those things. And I'd like to say hi to those of you just joining us. We're here with Farah Jones and Amber Abundance, and we are talking about all the things that you probably are going to get asked at Thanksgiving. This is a great time to have. We're talking about colorism and racism and phobia and anti-Blackness, and ways that we can also, as I'm about to ask them, ways that we can become more aware of this. So welcome. Also, if you're watching, I just want to say thank you. Push Black depends on your donations and on your shares. So please donate if you can. And if you can't, share with that rich relative. Share with that relative that you know is going to come in something fly for the Thanksgiving dinner. Let them donate and keep the work that we do going. So thank you very much. So back to our discussion, y'all. So we talked, obviously there are some things that are really explicit, right? Like homophobia or fat phobia, or things that we can see. But what are some things that we might do subconsciously around those isms and those phobias that can accidentally support white supremacy, or hurt our Black community, hurt our Black people?
I would love to jump in on this one, because I used to be a middle and high school teacher. And so there's something that I would see all the time with the young folks. There's a lot of things, but one of them, just as an example, is so many kids, it'd be time for recess. It's a nice day. I live in California, it's sunny, and it's time to go play, and they're sitting in the shade, usually girls. We find out they don't want to get too dark. And that's a message that they got from home. Don't be out in the sun too much. You don't want to get too dark. And the message that that sends is kind of clear. It's that being darker is a bad thing that you want to avoid. And when it's given to girls especially, it's that being darker is less beautiful or less feminine. And so that's what you want to avoid as well. And so that's the message, even it's to our all young people of all shades. And I want to say too that it was not just Black children that I've heard make this same statement or communicate that they got that message at home to not get too dark. It was students of color across all races. And so that kind of idea of it's literal anti-Blackness. It's don't get too Black, you know? And so we might be saying that we might have this or that reason, or you might not even realize that we say it, or it's just something that we heard when we were growing up, and so then we repeat it to our kids, or etc. But that's an example of one that is still so widespread, and that I've heard among young people. And there's so many examples. We say things all the time without realizing, oh, this sends a subtle message that I didn't even realize I was communicating.
Yeah. That's a problematic phrase. Let's talk about some problematic phrases, because that's definitely one way that we can spread messages that we're not even realizing that we're passing on, or that we're doing. What are some other problematic phrases or things that we might say trying to help, that might inadvertently, if we have family members who are anything other than what the hetero, whatever, anybody, what are some things that we can say that are wrong? I know that I can give one, and this is something that I heard in my family until it was called out. And it was just like, oh, are you bringing your friend to dinner? Is your friend coming?
Your little
Knowing good and
friend,
well,
your
that's not
roommate.
right. That's not the friend. That's the significant other. That's hubby. That's wifey. That's lover. That's whomever. And to me, when you hear those things like friend, it kind of minimizes a relationship. It's like that's almost saying that because that relationship is not a heterosexual cisgender relationship, that it's only relegated to friends. Nothing wrong with friends, but you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
That's
So
not a friend.
yeah, what are some other things y'all can think of that we might inadvertently say or hear that really might just be subconsciously sending those anti-Black messages?
There's so many. I think anything that assumes uh what is heteronormativity, anything that assumes homogeny, even in Black spaces, falls in that category, right? Like, there's this assumption that everybody wants to be thin. There's this assumption that everybody is straight. There's this assumption that everyone is, in my family, strong and, just able to make it through. And I think any of our comments that stray in that direction, or assumption that everyone can have kids when they want to have kids, any conversation that strays in that direction, that is a way for you to jump over getting to know someone or being able to see them for who they are and being okay with what those answers are, leads to those problematic conversations. And I think about this often because, sometimes I go back and forth on on how much I can hold coming at me from my family. And whether I want to do that in a setting where all of them are there at once. Most time I don't want to, especially now, like, I just don't want to deal with it. And that, a piece of that is me still building up the tools in order to have these conversations that have gone from speaking generally about maybe news headlines to really defending who I am as a person, which is what has made things harder for me to have these conversations. So I know you're talking about phrases. Maybe I have a rejection of naming all of them because they're so abundant. Like, it's like back, it feels endless sometimes of the ways people just want to push, especially Black children, Black folks who are younger, and not elders, into being who they want them to be and not who they actually are. And I think anything that is trying to push your understanding into what you want someone to be instead of who they actually are is the issue. Ask people more questions and be okay with those answers, because we tend to make this about identity and whether or not you agree with how someone identifies. But I don't agree with all the choices some of my family members make outside of identity. And you don't see me trying to, and I should, but yeah, it's just like the same respect you will offer to anybody else at that table. I honestly feel like more queer, we gotta like start roasting back at this point. Um, so we try to talk about healing, but though I feel like a part of my healing is really naming that stuff, because unfortunately my generation, I feel like, is actually in a conversation about healing, in a conversation about how we've always done it isn't enough anymore. We don't want to put all this grief on our back. We don't want to put and even that kind of conversation tends to be hostile in some of our families, which is really hard, because at the end of the day, I just want to be free, and I want you to be free too. Literally in the place where or safe, not even just free. I want all of us to feel safe when we gather. And that is something I keep identifying for myself, is like, when someone feels uncomfortable, let them say that. Like babies, if they don't want to hug you, they say they don't want to hug you. How can we make that okay for the adults in our family or the teenagers in our family, who, when they say no, that feels uncomfortable to me, that's respected instead of just brushed aside? So that's what I offer a lot to folks who are going into those family situations, because not all the time can you even address it without it being a battle royale. And like, my hope is that there's less of a battle and more of a willingness to hear and understand that is not white people shit. That is also Black people shit, and should be Black people shit.
And I think it's so important to talk, because I disagree with you a little bit, that I think, because it can happen so subtly, that I think sometimes we do. I think the biggest, most important thing is what you're talking about. Like, can we just be respectful and not assume things about people and get to know folks and have conversations and love each other? Like, that's the key, right? But sometimes I think that we can, do or say things without questioning them and not realize the impact that they have, especially on young folks, like you were saying. And so I think, like, for example, we were talking about gender, right? Like, we do a lot of things and say a lot of things, maybe in gatherings, maybe there's kids at the Thanksgiving, meal or whatever. We do a lot of things like, um, you know, uh, a little boy is running around, trips and falls and is crying, and we're like, don't you cry, big boys don't cry, right? Or you better man up, right? And what we don't realize, that those kind of things enforce a particular view of gender, similar to how when we're talking about, like, oh, it's your little friend, it enforces this idea that some relationships are valid and some aren't, right? Or some of the other examples we've talked about. Like, I think it is really important that we get specific and intentional about the ways that we talk to children, especially, but also, like, the ways that we talk to each other, like you're saying, Amber. Like, how can we, because I don't think it's just going to happen. Like, if we don't do that intentional work to, like, really interrogate ourselves and what we were taught and what we're trying to teach young people and how we communicate and love our family members and friends, like, if we don't do it really intentionally, we're just going to keep repeating the same things that we were taught, and what that was what our parents were taught, and that's what their parents were taught, and it just doesn't change unless we actually do something specific to try and break that cycle and try to create a new culture, preferably one that's not
back from having those, like digging into those conversations. I feel like sometimes that's seen as something you do in college or something that the younger kids do. Like, how have you seen people kind of like pick that up in order to be better family members?
I don't know the answer to that question necessarily, but I do have a friend, and she was telling me, she called me, one of my best friends the other day, she called me and she was crying, and I was like, what? And she was like, I can't believe how happy I am.
Mm.
And I was like, what is it? She's like, my mom started going to therapy, and our relationship has completely transformed. Her mom's in her 60s, right?
Mm.
First time ever going to therapy, and like within months, the relationship between them, which was always strained,
Mm.
was going in completely new directions because her mom had that experience of finally having a safe space to really talk about these, to really do that work of interrogating and looking deeply and thinking about herself and the trauma she'd experienced and how she parented her child. And I think one of the reasons why it's so hard is because, like you were saying, oftentimes the things that we're uncomfortable with out in the world are things that we're uncomfortable with inside. And that's scary,
Mm.
to do that work and to dig. Oh, I don't want to dig deep into my deepest fears and my whole existential identity and how I exist. That's like, those are tough, scary things to like really dig deep into, so a lot of us avoid it.
Yeah, not to cut you off, but it's important that I really pull out some threads for some things that we've been having through this amazing conversation. You all can see that my cat Minu has now entered the chat. He I don't know. He
You
can't
might be
take
able to
it.
hear my cat meowing too in the background.
Okay, so that like he's always he's here. So I apologize for Minu, but he's cute. So if y'all see him, he's cute. So I think that makes up for it. Some things that you guys said, I think we really need to pause and take a moment to really hold in our spirits. And one of the things is that when these things are said, when we, whether intentionally or unintentionally, hold these phobias and isms, it dehumanizes our children. Stop it, Mimi.
Mm.
It dehumanizes our children. I'm sorry. See, it dehumanizes our children, and it teaches them certain things. Like when Farah was saying, don't get too dark because you don't get in the sun because you don't want to get too dark. And Amber, when you were saying that there's just so much that could be said and there's such an abundance of it. However, one of the things that you guys were proving that I want to call out is that there's also an abundance of ways to unlearn those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to dig a little deeper into that. What are some ways that we can unlearn those behaviors? And before you all answer, again, I want to thank our new viewers. I see many people joining. We're excited to have you. Right now, we're having a discussion on the phobias and isms and problematic phrases that can dehumanize us and also our children. So thank you guys for joining. Thank you all for being supporters of Push Black as well. We couldn't do our work without you. So when you see the opportunity to donate, please do. And if you can't donate, pass it along to rich friends, rich family members, because the support, we really need and appreciate the support. Again, we're talking with Farah Jones and Amber Abundance, both who are good friends of the show and Push Black. And they are about to just help us. If you're suffering from, as we all are, sort of the effects of this anti-Blackness and all of these things that are going on, these are learned behaviors. What are some of the things that we can do to unlearn?
All I have to say is it has to be intentional, like I was saying before. It's not just going to happen. I often use, when I do workshops, I talk about anti-Blackness and systems of oppression generally as like one of those people mover conveyor belt things in the airport.
Mm.
Like if you're standing still, it just kind of moves you along. You don't have to make any effort. And so if you're just like not actively being anti-Black, if you're not actively hating Black people or, hating people of other marginalized identities, whether immigrants or disabled folks or queer trans folks or whoever, you're still part of the system and you're going to keep moving along with this conveyor that's part of the United States and the world, which is anti-Black and oppressive in all of these different ways. The only way to actually work against that system is to literally turn around and start going the other direction. And so if you're just standing still, you're moving right along with the rest of the system if you're just not doing anything. But so if you really want to make some changes, you've got to actively figure out how you're going to make that happen. And that, I think that looks different for lots of people. But it definitely has to be intentional. But Amber, I know that one of the most powerful ways is like creating art, right? And I know that's something that you do really beautifully. I don't know if you have other ideas and suggestions too for how you've gone, along that journey as well.
Yeah, I think being able to write some of these things out, because of, especially right now, the deeper I get into my work, it's all about going through your memory, taking things out of your memory and just really looking at it and being like, how did this shape who I am now? What do I wish I would have done differently? Or how would I approach the same problem now? An entry point to me in being able to create art is experiencing art. So when I, speaking of, I love the analogy of the conveyor belt, because even though I've been fat my whole life, I never really taken time to examine what that actually meant and how that was playing out in my life. I wasn't taking as much time, because I'm also from Ohio. We're very much a work hard, things will happen. And I think the older I got, the more I realized like I'm working pretty hard, but things don't always just happen because of that. What's at play? And what systems are at play? And when I start to dig into like books about these things, like I remember like reading, like learning about fatness and fat phobias. I read The Body Is Not an Apology so that I can get a better grip on how I talk about my own body. When I was coming into my queerness, I read Zammy, A New Spelling of My Name, and that helped me come into grips of all the ways that things are preventing you from being queer and Black and poor, and what does it mean to still claim that identity regardless, to still find your way in that. And then once you do realize you're not just heterosexual, or you're not participating in compulsory heterosexuality, how do you start to form your own identity? So to me, a lot of unlearning these things, it doesn't, you have to, like you said, I literally just will co-sign, like, you have to be an active participant in what you're learning. What are you replacing all of this anti-Blackness with? What are you replacing all this homophobia with? And I find the best way to start is by taking in the knowledge that in the breadcrumbs that our ancestors have left for us, that thinkers and scholars have left for us, in order to get to that. Like, literally unlearning is still the act of learning. It's reading things you would have never read before. When I got out of college, I made the commitment to only read Black and brown authors and women authors, because textbooks are not written by us.
Yes.
They're just not, and it's a wild thing to think about, that general knowledge is not written by people like us. And then when we do take time to write these very American, very universal stories, people are just put them aside as like, oh, that's queer literature, that's Black literature. And it's like, no, like, I was just watching a clip. I'll wrap up. I was watching a quick clip from the comedian Z-Way, and she uses a lot of satire in her work, but she was asking these Black people, these white folks, who is this Black person? and the Black person would be like Shirley Chisholm. And like they just didn't know. Like they would say, oh, these people look familiar, but they never take time to learn anything about us. And it just highlights for me how much I have to know about whiteness in order to survive, but then how you do still have to go in and learn your own history. And I think right now, especially for artists and the rise of the movement for Black lives and people caring about race and all these things, like the truth is some Black people ain't sat down and read some of this stuff too, but they're speaking on behalf of these things. And like, I'm very much into having some intentionality of learning about the things you do not know. Just because I'm queer doesn't mean I know about the history of queerness. Just because I'm Black doesn't mean I'm actually engaging and learning about Blackness and how to eradicate anti-Blackness. And we know that to be true because we can look at our culture and see it everywhere. We can see patriarchy even when, especially as someone who cares about colorism, the reality is a white person doesn't even have to be in the room for me to be discriminated on based on my race. Why is that?
Right.
Taking the time to really learn that stuff and being rigorous about learning those things.
And I think that that's so, yeah, it's so powerfully important. And that's also why organizations like Push Black are so important. Like, you're not going to learn, you're not going to learn how to love Black people in American institutions, in our schools, in any mainstream American institution, on the mass media, it's just not going to happen.
They're not teaching that.
It's not going to happen on purpose. They don't want that. Of course they don't want that to happen. And so we have to be doing the work to uncover our own history. Like you said, we need to read these books. We need to,
listen to them if you must. Like,
you need to seek out,
sorry.
Seek out the podcast, seek out the musicians, seek out the artists. You got to do it because the mainstream is not just going to put that in front of you. And this is something that I wanted to talk about too, is like, you mentioned this, I think, Leslie, that so much of the anti-Blackness in our culture is internalized in ourselves, right? And this is something I talk about in my workshops too, is there's different levels of oppression, right? And what we often talk about is interpersonal and institutional oppression, right? Which means interpersonal is when people are being, say, racist to each other. Institutional is when institutions like our economic system, housing, healthcare, education, criminal justice have racist impacts. But there's also the ideological level of anti-Blackness, which is kind of the foundations of this country and of most of the modern world. But there's also the internalized level. So that's when those ideologies and those systems and those people, they essentially convince us to hate ourselves. And that's kind of the ultimate, insidious nature of white supremacy, is that it's just all around us and we start to believe it. And so we start to hate ourselves and our own people. And it's kind of like in a lot of ways, often we're like fish in the ocean or in water. We don't even realize that we're surrounded by it. It's just in everything. It's in the air we breathe. It's in the media. It's in our schools, etc. And so it's really a lot of work to seek out genuinely pro-Black stuff, whether it's media or books or articles or art or etc. But it's absolutely essential that we do if we really want to be free. Like, freedom in an anti-Black society is not going to be easy, right? They do not want us to be free. They don't want us to express ourselves, to live our lives however we want, to express our gender or our sexuality however we want, to just have our bodies be whatever size we want, to take whatever jobs we want, to seek out, listen to this music or read these books, or there's so many restrictions on us. Just, why can't I just do what I want? And so it's definitely a lot of work to actually live a free life and to do what you genuinely want and to be your true self and etc. But it's really the only way to genuinely be free is to do that work.
Well, how can we protect ourselves against this anti-whiteness? This anti-Blackness.
There
Oh,
is that.
this this anti-blackness, this self-hatred, like they're even, I'm looking at some of the comments. Some of the comments that we have are definitely, you know, very anti-black in the comments, very anti everything in the comments. How can we protect ourselves? How can we protect our children? We know it's a lot of work. We know there's a lot of things going on, but is there any way that we can protect? I mean, yeah, so we would do the work of unlearning. We continue to work to do that. And we know that Push Black is definitely one organization that believes in that and that does that. So Push Black is definitely one way. Um, However, what are some other things that we can do to protect our children and to protect ourselves against the inevitable self-hatred that's going to come about? Because I'm not going to lie, I'm a heterosexual woman, but I'm a big woman. I live in a larger body. And, all my life, all I've heard was fat, ugly, oh, you like a boy, you're like a man or whatever. And it's like it took me a while to like not care about that, to unlearn it, to be myself. And I have a son, and I do everything I can to like build him up, protect him from that, because he's a big tall boy, and so it's just always making sure that the things that I wish I heard growing up in terms of being supportive, I tell him that so much that he just is like, yeah, I know. He's internalizing those things. But what are some ways that we can protect ourselves and protect our children and our future generations against this inevitable? This is just mess. I saw a comment earlier that was like, foolishness has no color and no gender. And yeah, how can we protect ourselves against this foolishness?
One of the things I want to say, well, I was going to say we can't. We can't protect them, right? They're going to experience, our young people are going to experience anti-blackness just by virtue of existing in an anti-black society. But what we can do is we can provide love in a safe space at home, and especially what I think we can do is we can model self-love. So there's, like Amber was saying earlier, we can talk about don't say this phrase, don't say that phrase. But the more important thing for young people and for our children especially is they look up to you, and do what I say, not what I do is not the wave. Like that's not how it works. That's not how kids learn. That's not, they see what you do and they know that that is the truth, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have to actually do the work yourself, and then you can be modeling that pro-blackness, that self-love in the way that you carry yourself, the way you talk to people, the way you love each other, and they'll see that instead of, passing down the anti-blackness that you were taught, you can pass down, self-love.
Yeah, absolutely.
I
So,
love that.
so Amber, you've given us a tool already that can help us with this. And it's your work Abundance. It's a short film. Um, tell us about the short film. Tell our viewers how they can find it. Just let us know what's up.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because it makes me emotional, because I do really believe that about that short film.
Yeah.
That is one of the tools that is in my toolbox, but it's the one that I want to like give to every person in my family. It's the one I want my niece to have. Like when she watched it, she just kept saying like, Amber is so beautiful. Like, and I just it fills me with so much pride, because as I shared with you all last time, the first time I watched it back, I just had like I was a mess. Like I was in tears. And it almost went to a place of being like, this isn't good because look at this fat, dark-skinned, like, is this good enough? Da-da. But it was the acknowledgement that I had never seen myself that way. I never seen myself that way on camera. I had never seen anything similar to it in media. Never. Never moving, never, like, I just had not seen that. And we need, as much as all these things come at us, we need a place where we can reground, a place that can tell us that we are loved again. And you can watch, but you can, now I'm like, let me move on before I start crying, but you can watch Abundance if you're following me on Instagram. It's just at Amber Abundance. And the links are in my bio. You can go to amberabundance.eventive.org and watch it there. And I have accessible ticket pricing. So it starts at $10 and you can give more if you're able. But yeah, that is what I am. As hard as it is, and I have my days where I can't get up, I can't write a single thing, that my goal is to give us something that reminds us that we're okay, that we are actually, that there are systems at play. My tools are be question the fuck out of systems. I period. Like, even in how they play out in people's life, like, I can always have grace for people, but these systems, a lot of these systems got to go because they have just perfected beating us down. And I just want these little reminders that doesn't have to stay that way, or it shouldn't be this way. So yeah, that's what I would say. Or you can just visit amberabundance.com and all my work is there too.
Well, thank you. And I have to say, like, and
I think your mic is covered.
I'm sorry.
I can't hear you.
Oh, can y'all hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, technology. I have to say, as I said the last time we were together, I watched your film, and I was a changed person from watching that film. And you think, it's just to sort of give a little bit of a spoiler. The film is 30 minutes or so, but that's 30 minutes that can shape the rest of your life. And it's really beautiful. And I want to say this too, regardless of how you identify, you need to watch that film. However you identify, our viewers, however you are in this world, whatever body or existence or gender that you are in, this film is going to change you in a good way. So I would definitely do that. So we only have a little bit of time left together. And so I want to ask you guys to keep sharing a little bit of wisdom with us. First, Farah, you're an educator. You teach people about these things, and you teach people definitely about how to navigate in the world, and you educate others who may not be informed about these types of things, that these things exist. What are some ways that we can take away this evening? And for those of you who do not celebrate Thanksgiving, or for whom this is a day of mourning, we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. For those of you who have family or don't have family or are not spending time with family, we want to take a moment to acknowledge that as well. We've done a lot of talk about being around family, but we want to acknowledge that Thanksgiving in and of itself is also an oppressive holiday, but that doesn't keep us from enjoying one another and celebrating in our own way if we celebrate. So I want to acknowledge everyone out there who might be struggling with the holidays, everyone out there for whom this is a time of mourning, or for everybody who just, may not even feel worthy, like you're just ready for this to be over so you can go on to the next thing. The question that I want to ask our guests, starting with Farah, is what are some ways that we can think about loving ourselves that we can take into this holiday season, regardless of where we are with our isms or our phobia? What's something we can do to immediately show ourselves some love?
Hmm. You put me on the spot a little bit there. um, I mean, someone mentioned in the comments just now of how important it is to have a community. And I've long been, I think the easy answer to this question is something around self-care or, just doing something nice for yourself. But um, I really like this concept and idea of community care. And especially when we are potentially about to, connect with some folks that maybe there are, biological family, maybe they're chosen family, maybe it's just friends, or maybe we're just alone. Um, the community really is often the key, and the key to community is love. And so I think one of the best ways to love ourselves or to practice doing it, because it's really difficult. There's so much pressure to hate ourselves, especially as Black people, but especially if we're of another marginalized identity as well. Um, is one of the best ways to practice is by loving other people. Um, and it's actually I think it was Lizzo who said, often we hear that like if you don't love yourself, you can't love other people. But Lizzo flipped it and she was like, if you can love me, you can love yourself. And sometimes I think that the by really doing our best to see the folks that are in our lives as whole people, as beautiful people. Maybe they have opinions we disagree with. Maybe they're people like some folks in the comments who want to say hateful things to people like me for some reason, that aren't useful as far as I can tell. Is figure out, well, how do I love that person? How do I love this person who I completely disagree with in my family? And that doesn't mean agreeing with them or just being nice all the time. Like Amber, like you were saying before, sometimes the most loving thing you could do for somebody is check them, and be like, actually, I'm going to be honest with you, because if I didn't care about you, if I was indifferent, then I just let things slide. But because I love you, we're going to have this difficult conversation. So it doesn't always have to look like happy feelings or whatever. But I think that doing that work, to love other Black people, even people we disagree with or people who are doing things we're not down for, is a great way to practice figuring out then how to love ourselves. So that might be something that could be my tip, I guess. At least that's what I could think of right now.
Yeah, thank you, Farah. Amber, what are some ways we can live and live more abundantly?
And just to know, I can't, for some reason, Instagram is not allowing me to see comments on lives that are online right now. But I just want to hold. It sounds like I just want to hold how grateful I am that you all are having this conversation, that we're all existing in this world exactly as we are, despite how anybody else fucking feels. I don't know if we allow the cuss, but y'all know my heart. And yeah, I feel like a part of living abundantly for me is I wear a necklace that says Black Joy, and that is real for me. It's where I pull a lot of my ability to move forward in a very anti-Black world. And I'm very much about letting it rip on people. Like not holding in anger just for it to fizzle inside of me, but again, being direct and honest about systematic oppression. I think right now, I love culture. I love popular culture, and I'm seeing it after all that happened in 2020. You're seeing this big push to internal love and internal care and all these individual things instead of the continual acknowledgement of systems killing us. I don't care what your brand is giving. You know what I mean? Like, we still have to acknowledge, like, yes, I'm gonna burn my candles and my incense, but also how are folks with more power than me going to address the things that are oppressing me? It's not personal oppression. It is very much a collective experience that we're all having. So a big part for me of living more abundantly is giving yourself space to be all that you are for yourself and in community with the folks who love you. And naming when you're not okay, naming when you need help, naming other people's responsibility to you as a person, as a human being walking this earth. And it's a thing that I have to constantly remind myself of, because I'm very much a like, I'm gonna do it myself. So that's what I want. That's what I really want for people. That's what abundance is for me, is doing whatever I want where I can. And also letting people know how they can be better in right relationship with me, as Sonia Renee Taylor often says. Like, we actually do have a responsibility to each other, and it doesn't start and stop at vaccines. It's how we treat each other. It's the support we give one another, how we love and on other people, so that that can be returned unto us as well. But I am grateful for this conversation and for all the brilliance you all have shared today.
Well, we too are very grateful. We're grateful for you. We're grateful for Farah, and we're also grateful for our viewers. This is the end of our live today. And once again, thank you guys for supporting this conversation, and for engaging with our amazing guests, Farah Jones, Amber Abundance. We do this work at Push Black because of you. So if you're able to donate, please do. Pass this along to rich relatives as well. And very important, we have another one of these conversations that's actually coming up. So we want you to set your reminder for it. And that is going to be next Friday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Central Time. So set your reminders for it. And with that being said, y'all, thank y'all. Thank everybody. And y'all have a great, great weekend, great celebration, or however you're spending your time. May it be wonderful and blessed.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank y'all. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.